Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, and sometimes serendipity interferes. You can just figure out if you want to leverage it and run with it or not. So very early in my career, it was a technical magazine publishing company, and a group basically mutinied, and they all left the company on the same day, which could have been devastating for a small company. I mean, it was like 90 employees. And the CEO of the company looked around and said, well, I got to have people to do things. So he just pointed to me and said, you're going to be a marketing director. And so I just kind of stepped in that, figured out how to do it, started managing salespeople. Suddenly I was a publisher managing about 5 million in revenue and probably 25 employees. And we got sold off in the mid 80s. And the new company that bought us said, hey, we like this business. We want you to go out and buy companies. It was like throwing a 6-month-old baby in the pool and saying swim. We just went out and started doing it and figured it out as we went along. And I got a PhD on my very first deal because I screwed it up badly.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Palacio and Partners, providing turnkey podcast creation, hosting, production, promotion, and related creative resources for you and your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Cam Bishop. Cam's passion is in mergers and acquisitions. He spent 23 years at Intertech, a division of Prime Media Incorporated, many of those years as a CEO and president. He also spent 3 years as CEO of SkillPath Seminars, and he held several positions as a merger and acquisition consultant for a variety of companies. Currently, Cam is the managing director of Raincatcher, helping entrepreneurs buy and sell companies in their pursuit of the American dream. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Cam.
Cam, welcome to the Corporate Couch this afternoon.
Hey, Jeff, great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I was shocked that we're both in Kansas City, and we did not ever meet until about 2 weeks ago. We had like 200 mutual first connections on LinkedIn, so here we are. So excited to talk to you. You've had a great career, and can't wait to dig into it and what you're doing now. So, but let's start with a fun question. Even if people know you fairly well, Cam, what would surprise them about you?
Well, I think, as I mentioned a little bit before we got started here, I'm kind of a frustrated artist. So I do some acrylic painting, all abstract, mostly for fun. It was something I kind of took up and got into during the COVID period when we all had to sit around at home. But I find that it's a great creative outlet for starters, but it's fascinating when you have a blank canvas. It's like a blank sheet of paper if you're a writer. I mean, it can be really a little bit of an uncomfortable process, but I do enjoy it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, as a lot of great writers say, to write, you have to just write. So I'm sure it's the same thing, any artist and creative activity. If you're going to be a comedian, write jokes, practice jokes, artists, just do the art.
Yep.
Love that. Where'd you grow up?
Well, I'm, as you mentioned, we're Kansas City guys, and I am born and raised Kansas City guy. Kansas City is separated by the state line, literally a road called State Line. So I grew up on the Missouri side of that line in an area called South Kansas City, in a community called Ruskin Heights, which was one of the first tract home development communities in the entire country. Wow. And also the home of one of the most devastating tornadoes to ever hit anywhere in the United States, still to this day. And that was my earliest childhood memory, going back to, I think it was 1957, 58, something like that.
Right.
Missed my home by about 4 blocks.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard about that tornado. Yeah, it's yeah, it definitely was devastating to that area for sure. Yeah. So what was fun for you growing up? What did you love doing?
Well, we were, the neighborhood was pretty much a sort of middle class to lower middle class blue collar neighborhood. So it was obviously a simpler time. And, we had tons of kids in the neighborhood. So, and I grew up in a home, we had no air conditioning. So in the summertime, it was as cool outside as inside. So we just, as kids, spent all of our time outside playing. It was whether it was riding bikes or street kickball. That was our world back in those days.
Yeah, it's amazing. I did not grow up with air conditioning either. So it's amazing how heat tolerant you are when you grow up without air conditioning. Like
Yeah.
we'll be somewhere in like Mexico and I'll be just reading, out on the chair, lounge chair by the pool. My wife goes, "Aren't you hot?" I'm like, "No, I'm good." She goes, "I got to get in the pool." I go, "I'll go in the pool with you, but I could sit here and read.
Yeah.
I don't care."
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I have a really nice screened-in porch, and even in the summertime, I'm out there when I'm obviously not working.
Yeah, I love that. What did you have any aspirations as a child? Like, hey, when I grow up, I want to be an astronaut or a doctor or sports.
Yeah. Like most kids, I was a sports fanatic. I desperately wanted to play professional football. I had a little kid's football uniform that I ran around in all the time. Unfortunately, in middle school, I sustained a kind of severe injury, which kept me from ever really being able to follow up on that dream. I was a kicker in high school, but back in those days, teams, especially in high school, didn't really kick footballs. So there wasn't much activity around there. But when it came to careers beyond that, originally, I wanted to be an architect. In high school, I took a drafting course where we had to design a home. And I guess kind of like my art, that was a creative outlet. And I really wanted to be an architect, but frankly, I just didn't have those complex math skills around trigonometry and that sort of thing. But as a ninth grader in an English class, we had to design a newspaper. And I really fell in love with that process. And that's why I ultimately went to journalism school at the University of Missouri. I was sports editor of a high school paper. I wrote freelance sports stories for local community papers. I wrote a creative column for an office campus newspaper at Missouri and shot sports photography there as well. So yeah, that's where I spent most of my career. It was in the field of journalism.
Very cool. What was I know Missouri's had a kind of up and down football history and basketball history, but what were the basketball football teams good at that time when you attended?
They were reasonably good. They certainly weren't. They were rarely big. Back in those days, it was the Big Eight contenders, but they were generally respectable, especially more with the basketball program back then.
Yeah. So after you went to Missouri, what was your first job right out of college, and how'd you get it?
Well, it's interesting. So I originally thought I was going to be a journalist, like a reporter or an editor or something like that. But I discovered that was a tough way to really make substantial income. So I went through the advertising program at Missouri, and I started my career as an advertising copywriter. But when I got out of college in the mid 70s, it was a little bit of a recession, and there had been a massive influx of kids going through journalism programs following the Woodward and Bernstein book, All the President's Men. So the market economically was soft, a little bit of a recession, glutted market for kids. So I actually drove a forklift and worked on a dock at a local big box retail store for a year while I searched for a job in the journalism field, and started my career as an advertising copywriter in a small technical magazine publishing company here in Kansas City.
Yeah, I usually would wait on the following question, but I think it's so interesting, because I think you're talking about Intertech Prime Media, that you started out as a copywriter. So it looked like you went just, about a 24-year run there. And And did you have it? I mean, you eventually became the president slash CEO. So at, 23, 24 years old, when you started there, whatever the age you were, did you say, hey, I'm going to be president of this company someday? And did you have a career strategy if that was the case?
Absolutely not. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And sometimes serendipity interferes, and you can just figure out if you want to leverage it and run with it or not. So, very early in my career, it was a technical magazine publishing company, and a group of employees basically mutinied, and they all left the company on the same day, which could have been devastating for a small company. I mean, it was like 90 employees doing $7 million a year. And the CEO of the company looked around and said, well, I got to have people to do things. So he just pointed to me and said, you're going to be a marketing director. And so I just kind of stepped in that, figured out how to do it, started managing salespeople. We did well enough that we turned around several of the troubled properties, and suddenly I was a publisher managing about $5 million in revenue and probably 20, 25 employees. And we got sold off in the mid 80s. And the new company that bought us, Macmillan, Fortune 100, said, hey, we like this business. We want you to go out and buy companies. It was like throwing a 6-month-old baby in the pool and saying swim. We just went out and started doing it and figured it out as we went along. And I got a PhD on my very first deal because I screwed it up badly.
So you basically get this promotion based on, because you're one of the few that didn't leave, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you're young. I mean, you're mid-20s at this point in your career. Like, what was your process to learn, like, marketing and leading a sales team? I'm sure they were much older than you, or at least older than you, and then they throw you into a acquisition strategy, and you're leading that. So talk about your process. And did you have mentors? Did you read books? How'd you learn?
No, it was just a daily immersion process. And you're right. I had a sales team. I think it was probably 10 or 12 salespeople spread out all over the country. Back in those days, almost all salespeople in the media industry were male. And most of them, again, I was 25, maybe 26, were men in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. So I knew right away if I was going to gain any respect from them, that I always had to be a step ahead of them. So again, this is pre-computers. So I had to be extremely organized, and I would just take copious notes, and I would just stay on top of these guys in terms of, what are your plans? Who are you calling on? And when you can stay a step ahead of them over time, you can gain their respect. And that's what we did. And we formed a great team. We worked a lot in unison, and we gained significant market share. And every time when you're winning things, it's amazing how smoothly things can go.
Any stories of, a salesperson or somebody else you were leading, kind of resisted, kind of, became combative, or like, this guy doesn't know anything. I've been here 20 years. I'm 48 and he's 26. Any of those stories?
Oh, yeah. Over time, you manage a whole lot of different types of personalities. One interesting story, I hired a guy out of New York who was of pretty significant Italian heritage. And we were subleasing space from a parent company at that time. And the parent company started reporting that there was unusual loss of office equipment. And again, at that time, a IBM correcting Selectric typewriter that was the Ferrari of office equipment.
Right.
And two of those turned up missing. And there was a connection back to this one sales guy. And he was a pretty big guy. I don't mean fat big. I mean, he was just a big guy who claimed to be a black belt in karate. And in those days, we gave people company cars, and his company car turned up missing. And I had to fly to New York and meet with this guy and terminate him. And I'll be honest, I was scared to death.
Oh, God.
You oftentimes mature pretty quickly when you're faced with that kind of situation. I mean, I didn't know what was going to happen, but it was something I had to do, and I did it. Fortunately, he kind of left peacefully, but we didn't find his company car for another couple of weeks, and it had been pretty ransacked, and basically it was trashed. So yeah, that's one of those early maturing experiences for a young manager that helps you grow up fast.
Yeah, I'm sure. And this guy gives New York Italians a bad name, like being one
Well,
myself. So there you go.
That was probably an unfair stereotype, but there were
It's
some
all good.
pretty coincidental connections
Right.
between his time in the office and when equipment stopped going missing.
Yeah, he was an early pioneer of having a side hustle, side gig. He was selling stuff he stole from the office.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh boy, I love that. So Kim, at what point did you think you were going to be like running the company, or again, like what was you're heading up marketing and sales, you're running 25 people, you're doing well. Did you have a strategy at some point to go, I think I have a shot to run this company someday?
Again, I really didn't. I mean, we were just running so fast. I traveled extensively for 35 years in the media industry. I traveled extensively, 25 to 35 times a year, all over the country, all over the world. I think I've now been in, 26 or 28 different countries. And at the same time we were building this business, the China market was starting to open up. And we had a very interesting opportunity to be an early pioneer in some joint venture relationships with China. And I was the guy that was tapped, I think I was 30 years old at that point, to go to China and try to negotiate some of these joint venture deals where we would begin to publish our technical magazines in China. And again, it was still a third world country at that time. This is not quite mid 80s. It was maybe 6 years after Nixon had normalized relations with China. So there were no Western style hotels in that country. It was a daunting opportunity. So ultimately, I negotiated deals to do joint venture publishing with the Ministry of Telecommunications, the Ministry of Television and Radio, and the Agricultural Ministry to publish our technical titles over there. So I would fly over there, spend 10 days, 2 weeks. I was over there as many as 3 weeks at a time on some occasions. One of those kind of hairy experiences on a later trip. At that time, if you were a business person and you wanted to go to China, you had to have an invitation to go. And it was like a catch-22. You could only go if you knew somebody in China to give you the invitation. And if you didn't know somebody, you could never get the invitation. Well, I had the ability to open those doors. So we developed a whole new line of business where I took, I think it was like 24 kind of almost all senior marketing executives or CEOs, telecommunications and broadcast equipment manufacturing companies, literally from all over the world, to China. And we set up a tour through 4 or 5 different cities to tour electronics manufacturing plants, radio and television stations, telecommunications facilities. And during the course of that, one of the British executives there fell out of bed in the middle of the night having a severe seizure. And he was taken to the American hospital in Beijing, which was built in the 1930s by, I think, FDR. And it looked like something out of a movie. I mean, mahogany walls and wood floors and wispy white curtains. But my partner in the process, who spoke fluent Chinese, had to stay with him. So I had to run the rest of this trip on my own, kind of surviving on very little knowledge of the Chinese language and just the other connections I had made there through businesses. And I think I lost 10 pounds in 7 or 8 days for the stress of that one.
Wow.
And we ended up, we had to pay cash to get this gentleman that fell ill an MRI, our brain scanned, and then we had to work through diplomatic channels. And ultimately, his company in England flew a private ambulance jet over there to pick him up and take him back to England. So that was a fairly taxing experience for sure.
What a story. What would you say your biggest accomplishment there was?
Well, in terms of that particular thing, just getting those joint venture deals in place. And when we were again acquired by what became Prime Media, they knew about my experience setting up these JV deals, and they wanted to do the same thing with one of their huge American consumer magazines for teenage girls called 17. So I was tapped to go back with the chief corporate legal counsel, and we spent 3 weeks over there. And the carrot for us at that time, there was only one private golf club in the entire country of China, and it was a course designed by Nicholas. And it was maybe an hour's drive outside of Beijing. So we spent 3 weeks negotiating this deal, and once it was finished, we were going to get to play this golf course. It's like, come on, who gets to play at the only golf course in China at that time?
Right.
And the driving range, they used floating golf balls, and you would tee your golf balls up, and they would hit out into a pond where they floated. Well, the deal fell through at the last minute on some pretty technical matters, and we never got the deal done, and I ended up not ever getting to play that golf course. But I did get to go have dinner with the head diplomat for the United States in China at that time, William Sasser out of Tennessee. So that was just a very cool experience.
So what ended your time at Prime Media?
Well, as you mentioned, I was there for 23 years. I kind of moved up the food chain. And I started out running about a $5 million line of business. And as we did multiple acquisitions, last few years there, I was a division president, and I was running about $100 million of the company's revenue, almost all in technical, digital, radio, television, film, broadcast. Started the first cellular telecommunications industry magazine. And the CEO of the company at that time left. He retired. And I was tapped by the chairman of the parent company to step in and run the business. And we were still in a heavy acquisition mode. I mean, from my time there, we grew the business from $7 million in revenue. And when I left, we were at about $400 million in revenue, and we were a money machine throwing off about $100 million in EBITDA profits.
So when you did decide to leave, did you do it voluntarily, or it was just time to move on to your next stop, or what was the reason for leaving?
Well, it was an unfortunate deal, man. I loved that company. We had a fantastic corporate culture there. We had over 2,000 employees in 23 U.S. cities at that point, but it was headquartered here in Kansas City. I think we had 500 or 600 people here in Kansas City. But the parent company in New York, which was 50% New York Stock Exchange traded and 50% private equity owned. The chairman of our company, I think he never really heard the full story, but I suspect he had a disagreement with the head of the private equity firm, and they chose to part ways. And the new chairman came in, was a very disagreeable fellow, and he and I just did not get along. He had a completely different vision and placed very little value on corporate culture and our industry in particular. So it was obviously his call, but I left, got a nice severance package. So I took some time off. I spent 6 months developing a business plan to do a new, what's called in the private equity world, a leverage roll-up, where you buy a platform company, then tuck in companies, which is what we had executed at Intertech, my previous company. We'd done 40 some odd deals to build this company to 400 million. So I literally, on my own nickel, flew around the country for a year, pitched my concept and business plan to about 50 private equity firms, and ultimately landed a partnership with, at that time, JP Morgan Chase Bank had a $6 billion private equity group, and we partnered together to build a new media company, which was called Ascend Media at that time. And it was focused on primarily the healthcare market sector, medical education, medical journals, that sort of thing. So yeah, we built that for literally my kitchen table to roughly 120 million, 500 employees, 7 cities over 3.5 to 4 years.
Wow. I want to go back to the culture. What were some of your steps to build a great culture, especially obviously in the Kansas City office when you were the president?
Well, first of all, I had a great team of people. We were a little bit eclectic in terms of their backgrounds. It wasn't a cookie cutter environment, but I just think if you, I've always been a huge believer in the concept of not just communicating well with employees, but over communicating. Because anytime you don't communicate effectively, you leave a gap, and that gap very easily gets filled in by suspicion, rumors, and innuendo. And once those start, they're almost impossible to stuff out. But we had a respectful environment and where we were willing to listen to people and adapt many times their ideas. And in acquiring companies, again, I think we acquired about 40 of them. Everybody always, in the acquisition world, M&A world, people always focus everything or virtually everything on the front end of the deal, what the price they're going to pay, what the deal terms are going to be, but they spend very little time focused on the integration strategy. And they also normally take on the attitude that, hey, I'm buying you, I'm right, you're wrong, therefore it's going to be my way or the highway. Well, we took an entirely counter approach to that, where with the teams that we were acquiring, we sat down and talked individually with every one of them. And we would then adapt and adopt best practices from their organization. The chairman of my former company would always say when we would go up to present what we were doing on a deal to get final sign off, he would always say, Cam, first figure out what they're doing right and don't screw that up. There's a reason you're buying them. And that's what we would do. And as part of that whole integration process, when we met with these people we were acquiring, we would run through a very effective program we would call Start, Stop, Keep. So we would sit down with each of these people individually in a room where they wouldn't be intimidated or influenced by anybody else from their company. And we'd say, okay, Jeff, what would you like to see this company continue to do? Because again, we want to keep what's sacrosanct and what everybody values. What would you like to see this company start doing? And invariably, a lot of employees, even mid-level, lower level, can have some fascinating ideas to grow and build a business, but nobody ever asked them before. And then the last question was always the negative. What would you like to see the company stop doing? But by the time you got to that question, you already knew what the answer was going to be because they answered it in the affirmative or the positive by what they would like to see the company start doing or continue to do. And it proved to be invaluable for us because there's things going into a deal that we would have automatically decided, well, we're going to change that. But we found that it was extremely critical for those employees. So we would adapt those along with whatever processes and procedures that we found that were successful for them. And that's what made the company as a whole even better and allowed those employees to integrate successfully and comfortably into our kind of growing aggregate business.
Yeah, I love that. A couple of things about what you said. One is, I've been on both sides. I've been in the acquiring company. I've been acquired. And my last experience with that, we were about 25 million in revenue, a company called Aratana Therapeutics, and we got bought out by a very large animal health company, about 4 billion at the time in global annual revenue. And they treated us like we knew nothing. It was pretty funny. Yeah. I was just like, I knew I wasn't going to have a job, so I was like, whatever, you're going to live with it, not me. But yeah, and I love that process you went through. I learned that at Sprint in the early days. We called it stop, start, continue. And it's just it's a very simple tool that can give you great insight. And, and the other way, or the other thing I would say that, you treated people, respectfully and as humans. I know it sounds crazy, but you're like, they built a company, like your colleague said, you bought them for a reason. It's probably good to talk to them and listen. So that I applaud that. Cam, did you have any, again, you're a young leader starting from, about 25 years old and a ton of responsibility, become president, then, build Ascend Media, and run that. Did you have any leadership mentors, whether it was people that you knew or mentored you, or books, or what was your process?
Well, generally it was kind of instinctive, but we had a CFO at the company. And again, as you can tell from my gray hair, I go way back before computers. And we had this really kind of sort of crotchety, chain smoking CFO who, when it came to numbers, was like almost a savant. And again, that's back when all the accounting and bookkeeping was done with a number two lead pencil and green ledger paper. But this guy had instincts and insight that were really amazing. You know, he didn't teach you by saying, Cam, do this and do that. You learned, if you were open to it, just by watching what he did, listening to him, how he analyzed a business or looked at the numbers. And you just began to learn it over time by following along with him. But probably even more so, I had the incredible luck of, I mentioned, the chairman of our parent company when we were acquired by Macmillan. There was a brilliant, amazing man. His name was William F. Riley, and he was the chairman of Macmillan Publishing. And he, to this day, I owe tremendous debt to him for what he was able to teach us, the discipline he instilled in us. He was demanding, he was tough, but he was extremely fair. And when Macmillan went under a hostile takeover, he and two other top managers, the chief legal officer I mentioned earlier and the president, all left the company. That's when they teamed up with the huge private equity firm Colbert Kravitz Roberts, formed the new company, which became Primedia, and he turned right around and bought our company back. So I had the great fortune to actually work for him for 15 years. And his process was at least four times a year, we would fly to New York and do what was called an operations review meeting. And this was before PowerPoint. Everything was done on transparencies with an overhead projector.
Right.
And we would go up there and we would have to do an extremely detailed presentation about our business. We could run through all the financials, be prepared to explain any variance or anomaly in our numbers. And heavens forbid if you didn't already know those answers. So we would start days ahead of time in our conference room here in Kansas City. This brilliant CFO I worked with, one of my counterparts, who was another, I'd gone to J school with him, and we were equals, and he was smart as hell. I was probably a little stronger on the marketing side. He was definitely stronger on the sales side, but we both were well aligned on kind of mission, vision, values, and overall style. And we would put together 100 or 150 of these acetates, take them to New York, and CFO, he would put them up there on the screen. And the requirement was you had to stand up next to the screen with an old-fashioned wooden pointer with a little black pointy rubber tip on
Right.
it. And you would have to stand there and point to the numbers on the screen,
Right.
and walk through a full dialogue, create a story out of what those numbers were, why they were there, if there was a problem, what you were doing to fix it. You want to make sure always that you knew you had a problem. And next time you were there, man, he was going to ask you, you knew it, what that problem was. And we had to be so prepared that we would fly to New York the night before the meeting, and I would literally stand at the bathroom mirror in my hotel room, oftentimes for 2 or 3 hours, rehearsing my presentation for the next day, because you did not want to get caught not having your answers. And man, talk about a way to learn your business inside and out. And to make it worse, he was a Harvard MBA and he had all these Harvard interns. So when you went into a corporate boardroom, you'd have him as the chairman, the president, chief legal officer, head of HR. This was a billion plus company already at this point, along with 10, 15, 20 of these Harvard MBA kids all sitting around in the back of the room taking notes. So you knew everything you said was going to be documented. So you knew it had to be accurate. And again, that became really a godsend in terms of helping you learn how to analyze a business, look where the opportunities are as where the weaknesses are, and to be ahead of it at all times. So a lot of it was forced learning just because you want to survive, but also we kind of created a contest out of it where the goal was to try to get out of one of these meetings without having a list of things that we didn't have answers to. It never happened.
Wow.
We always left with the to-do list because the guy was so damn smart and insightful. He was going to find things you didn't think of, but it forced us to really learn and know and understand our business.
Are you drowning in boring corporate communications? Palacio and Partners is here to rescue you. We transform internal podcasts from snooze fest to must-listen content that actually connects your team and strengthens your culture. Imagine podcast episodes that make your employees laugh while staying informed. Our founder, Jeff Palacio, doesn't just create podcasts, he creates conversations that break through the noise. Whether you're a growing startup or a massive corporation, we turn your company's story into audio gold. Leadership becomes human. Remote teams feel connected. Your message cuts through the clutter. Palacio and Partners, where corporate communications gets a fun makeover. Let's make your podcast work harder than your email inbox ever could. Jeff is happy to share his insights on podcasting with you. You can contact him via LinkedIn or schedule a Zoom call via the link in the episode description.
I worked at AT&T, and everybody has their AT&T had acronyms, but they were, the transparency were like VG1, VG2, and VG stood for view graph. And I'll never forget, people used to, actually write on the transparency sometimes to point something out. I'll never forget some guy, instead of writing on the actual view graph, he wrote it on the screen.
The glass projector screen.
Yeah.
Well, we had to do the same thing from time to time, or there would be a whiteboard, and he would say, "Well, let's work through this problem, Cam. Go over to the whiteboard." But he had this absolute hard line, don't ever do this rule. If you are ever writing on the whiteboard or on the acetate, don't ever use a red marker, because to him, red ink meant you were losing money.
Right.
So if anybody ever made that mistake, they only made that mistake one time.
Right.
It wasn't really a big deal. It was just kind of one of his hallmark things, but you just didn't do it.
Just get rid of the red mark.
Yeah, that's very true.
That's funny. I know you became the CEO of SkillPath in 2017, but talk about kind of your Ascend Media to your SkillPath journey, just briefly, because I know we talked about, we're both Tim Ferriss fans. We both read the 4-Hour Body, and they talked about the bod pod or whatever it was. But just kind of give us your journey to SkillPath, and we'll talk about that.
Well, the Ascend business, I mentioned I started with JP Morgan. That was a difficult ending on that business, being completely frank about it. The banking environment goes through cycles. So right now we're in a period of pretty restrictive requirements around debt and bank lending. Obviously, interest rates being 6-7%, SBA, I don't know, I think they're still up around somewhere between 8 and 11% interest rates. And you can't get much leverage on deals today, maybe 1 time, 2 times, if you're really lucky, 3 times on a killer deal. But back in the period when we were starting Ascend Media, we were in what was called a credit light environment, which became even more light a year or 2 after we put our capital structure in place. And so when we went to put our debt facility in place, I spent 3 days in New York, 8 or 9 hours a day doing presentations to bankers. And we were looking for $120 million. We got commitments for $240 million. And because there were limited covenants that were put on deals then, that made it even more attractive. So the private equity guys decided to leveraged the deal to the egregious level of 8 times, which is almost unheard of. Well, that was a great thing if there hadn't been a market downturn and the credit collapse and recession of 2007, 2008, and 2009, and we tripped covenants like crazy because the leverage was so high. There was zero margin for error. So we had to wind that business down, and ultimately I bought back part of that business with a small local private equity firm, kind of in the custom media marketing agency world. And I did that for about 5 years. And the private equity world can be a wonderful place to be, but it's an incredibly high pressure, high demand, 24/7, 365 kind of business. And I just said I can't do that anymore. So I spent a year in New York doing a turnaround for Hallmark Cards on a troubled division they had there. I love New York, so it was no problem for me to be up there. I think I was there 29 times in 11 months. And came out of that and joined a small boutique consulting firm here in Kansas City called Capitalist Group doing exit and transition planning. And from there, I was recruited by a headhunter to go do a kind of a technology transformation and business turnaround on this company, SkillPath, which is a very old, 35 plus year old, I think, leadership management development training company here in town. It's actually a 501c3 business. So I spent 3 years under contract doing that. And that was, we utilized my start, stop, keep methodology there to tremendous value, and did pretty much a complete transformation on that business, which allowed it to survive and hopefully thrive going on today because of the new technology we put in place. Because that was a business that was doing approximately 13,000 live in-person training seminars all over the country, and hotel meeting rooms and corporate training rooms. We had to flip that model in short order to a virtual training program, obviously, once COVID hit. After that engagement ended during COVID, I got extremely bored. I just get bored easy. And I said, well, I don't want to retire. I love working. What do I want to do? Well, I like buying and selling companies. So I went out and researched lower middle market investment banks and high-level business brokerage firms, and I found the firm that I'm with now. I've been there 4.5 years. I'm a partner and a managing director in a company that's based out of Denver called Raincatcher. And that's what I do. I do work from home, but we represent companies all over the country when business owners want to sell their businesses.
Yeah, we'll talk about Raincatcher in a second. I want to go back to SkillPath. Talk about transforming that company, because you and I chatted about it over coffee. I mean, I was, I know SkillPath is a nationwide company, but I, being at Sprint, I think we used to target, bigger companies, did a ton of direct mail. I remember getting mail pieces, delivered to me on different training programs. So, they had a pivot, and they were old school direct mail. They're not for profit. I think it's a partnership with Graceland University. Nobody likes change. Change is hard. Talk about how you brought that company from when you started in 2017 till first part of COVID when you left. Like, what was your process, and how did you get people rowing in the same direction and all that good stuff?
Well, when the board members interviewed me to hire me for the job, they said, well, we're looking for somebody who is extremely experienced in direct mail marketing, because that company was mailing about 40 million pieces of U.S. postal mail every year. And I'd studied the business pretty thoroughly before I went in for the interview. And my response to him was, actually, I don't agree with you. This isn't a direct mail, direct marketing company. This is a content company. This company is monetizing content in multiple channels. And for them, it was a little bit like a light bulb went off. I said, look, it's no different than the publishing world, where if we're publishing a magazine, we're selling advertising in that magazine, we're creating newsletters, we're creating conferences, we're putting up, digital material, websites, etc. Well, in this business, we're generating instructional content were delivering that in multiple channels. We had a digital subscription-based learning platform. We were doing customized versions of these programs to meet certain companies' objectives in training. We were creating newsletters, spinning out books. We built an in-house video production and recording capability. We were creating almost over 200 hours of instructional videos every year and monetizing those. We had, I forget now, probably a backlist library of maybe 200 or 300 instructional books. That was a profit division for the company. At the same time, we were kind of an early adopter on podcasting. We became extremely active in every social media channel. We built out an instructional training facility right in our corporate headquarters here in Kansas City as a combination of, it was for cost saving, it was for branding, it was to bring business owners and their employees to our location to build the brand for the business. But at the same time, we had to introduce significant technology change. The company was running on antiquated software. They had virtually no cyber security in place. I think when I got there, in an employee population of 220 employees, there was one laptop computer. So we had to make those transitions. So we had to bring in a lot of new talent as part of the whole process. And we weren't properly structured from a cost standpoint. So we had to go through a pretty significant cost efficiency program, rebidding contracts, right-sizing the company. And then we changed our entire sales strategy in our outsourced sales operation from a telephone kind of dial for dollars operation to a traditional professional and business development with assigned territories. And all those factors were difficult over the time because the company had a very long-standing, ingrained corporate culture that we had to figure out how to transition into a much more open, creative, and inclusive environment. And that just takes time. But again, as I said earlier on our podcast here today, a lot of that is driven by a rabid need to over-communicate. But at the same time, one of the keys to success, I've always been a believer in being the dumbest person in the room. So when I went out and hired an entire new senior management team, I hired, fortunately, really smart people. And I gave them the leeway to do what they needed to do to help transform the business. And we formed a very cohesive, collaborative team because of that.
Yeah, that's outstanding. So talk little bit about, I mean, did you get this passion for, buying business, selling business, working with business owners and people that want to acquire business? I mean, because you had at Intertech, 40 plus acquisitions. I mean, did that become a passion for you? Like, why mergers and acquisition? What kind of got your blood boiling doing, I don't know, boiling, but at least, you really want to help people that way.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you learn the most from the mistakes you made. So at Intertech, when we were told, hey, go buy companies, for better or worse, the first deal that came up was one that related to the technology titles that I was running in my division. So it was my deal. Thankfully, it was a very small deal. And we did what we thought we needed to do. And that deal died about a year after we bought it. And, you don't want to make those kind of mistakes more than once. And that became the beginning of the kinds of processes and procedures that we put in place to keep that from happening. And the biggest mistake I made, everybody thinks when you're going to buy a business, you're going to look at their accounting, you're going to run audits on it, you're going to, double check what they're doing here, you're going to evaluate their market share, their supply chain, whatever the case might be. And we did all that. We checked all those boxes. But what we did not properly do was properly assess the people and figure out, again, how to properly bring them into our fold and integrate them in to make them feel comfortable and to acclimate to our corporate culture, but to adapt part of theirs at the same time. And then we lost 2 or 3 key people because they didn't see the fit for them. That was the big mistake.
Right.
So we put very disciplined processes in place on both the buyer due diligence process, as well as how we evaluated and assessed the people and what the company's or the business's dependency was on each of those individuals to help mitigate risk against a loss of any of those people. So again, we were a deal machine. We were buying anywhere from 3 to 5 businesses at one time. We would carve out non-strategic assets, repackage those. Then we began selling businesses with those non-strategic assets. So you're running a business at the same time you're doing deals, and they're actually almost 2 full-time jobs. But we put a lot of very disciplined processes in place, and we approached all those with a specialized team. So if you're the production manager, you're going to do the diligence on production. HR does theirs. Me as a business owner, I was doing the marketing diligence or competitive diligence, etc. But then we would put everybody together at the same time, and everybody would have to report. And one guy would say, or one gal, whichever, would say, "Hey, wait a minute. If you discover this, that means I've got to do that." And that helped avoid tons of potential errors and mistakes in the process.
So talk about more about Raincatcher. Like, who's the target profile of people you can help the most, and how some of the processes you learn from past companies apply to Raincatcher.
Yeah. Well, again, one of the reasons the whole business of joining Raincatcher was attractive, and when I spent 5 years as a consultant doing exit and transition planning, when we were acquiring companies for both Intertech and in my startup business Ascend, we would find business owners who didn't want to spend the money to have professional representation, or they didn't know how to properly package their business or prepare in advance for a sale. We saw a lot of business owners sell to us and leave money on the table because they didn't really know completely what they were doing. And it wasn't my job as the buyer to tell them, "Hey, if you would just do this, I'd have to pay you $1 million or $2 million or $3 million more for your company." But I just saw it as kind of a sad thing. And that's why I worked helping business owners do that for 5 years. But we do a lot of that same kind of work at Raincatcher. We're not doing it on a pure consulting basis. We are what's called a sell-side firm. So we represent privately owned companies, family-owned companies at a point in time when they decide it's time to sell the company. And that's an increasing number of businesses because I think 10,000 baby boomers turn age 65 every day. Many of them are business owners. The vast majority of them do not have children who want to take over the family business. It's their primary source of generational wealth or potential generational wealth. They do want to retire, so they're left with the option of selling. And that's when they come to us. So we're what's called a lower middle market firm, which is a very underrepresented area or deal size for investment bankers. So almost all of our clients have minimum $1 million, most of at least $2 million in EBITDA profits, up to roughly $10 million. We'll have some outliers of maybe $15 million, but those businesses sell for generally between $5 and $30 million. Well, that's a lot of money to everybody I know, and those size companies are too small for the big investment banks, and by and large, with some exceptions, they're too large for most of what are referred to as the Main Street business brokers, because these deals require a much higher level of financial and deal sophistication. And we represent these owners just like the big banks. 2 of my partners came from big banks. As I mentioned, I've done over $500 million worth of deals. One of my partners I work with is a licensed CPA, spent 15 years with KPMG. So we treat our clients like the big banks, put out very professional materials, marketing in very professional ways in order to represent them. And we're what's called affiliated with a FINRA registered broker dealer. So we meet all of the national compliance requirements for being investment bankers. We've gone through the testing processes that you need to be validated as an investment banker. And that gives us the ability to represent business owners nationwide and to sell to buyers nationwide. And we do that in about any field you can imagine, from SaaS platform software, digital media, heavy construction companies, mining companies, a lot of business services. And it's a growing market. And when you can help these business owners through what is a very emotional, highly stressful, arduous, time-consuming process over generally 9 months, we get paid. We're an eat what you kill business. We get paid when we close the deal. I got to tell you, it's extremely satisfying to help these owners get a deal across the finish line.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. The people you can help doing that, and I know much less about it than you do, but I have been more involved and know a lot more people in that space. So I've heard some horror stories. So services like Raincatcher and working with great people like you has to be fantastic. So, Cam, I love to help two groups of people. One's that recent college graduate trying to figure out, okay, I got to get a job. They're beginning their professional career journey post-college. What advice do you have for them?
Well, it's not as appropriate today as it was back in my day when I got out of college, and everybody wore suits and ties. But somebody, I can't remember who it was, but it was one of my best pieces of advice, and it's somewhat symbolic. So somebody told me, because they said to me, Cam, dress for the job you aspire to, not for the job you're getting. And what that really means is you immediately begin to think about or think like the person that you're reporting to or what your promotional cycle looks like in order to be able to anticipate what they need in order to help facilitate that. And, that old axiom of 90% of the battle is just showing up. In this day and age, a lot of people just don't show up. They're not willing to put in the hard work. I always believed in, and I think it was one of the keys to my success, is always do more than it takes to get the job done. Right. Sometimes it'll never matter. A lot of times it does, and people begin to notice that. And people still value the soft skills that, those boxes don't get checked a lot of times for jobs, but loyalty, honesty, integrity, work ethic, being present, being accountable and reliable, man, those are still highly valued by people, but they don't get mentioned a whole lot. They want to check the boxes on what's your degree and what's your experience. But there's an old axiom in the recruiting world, hire for skill, fire for fit. And I've seen a lot of mistakes made where there's a laundry list of 20 or 30 criteria that they want to see in a job applicant. They hire them because they checked all those boxes, but they couldn't meet any of the soft skills or the intangible personality traits or factors to be a fit for the organization. They get booted.
Right. Yeah. I help recent college graduates with their first job search and career advice, and I always tell them, even if you're doing a Zoom call, dress up. I mean, it makes you feel better. There's some lift to it, I think. So I love that advice.
Well, I've interviewed probably thousands of people. So here's the key things and the mistakes I've seen made. If you're going to go into any type of interview, whether it's video, phone, or in person, do your homework on that company first. Getting a job is hard work. If you're really intent on doing it, do your homework. You should be all over their website. God, with AI today, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, the amount of information that you can get as background on a company and the individual that you're going to be interviewing with, especially with LinkedIn, you should know that person's background inside and out and always look for some kind of a common connection. If you went to the same university or had the same degree, or you both played a sport in high school or college, something that can create that common connection. Do your homework, go into the interview with a prepared list of questions that you want to ask that person. I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed who didn't have a single question for me about me as a person, about the job, or about the company, I knew immediately this wasn't that important to them.
Right.
And take notes. Take a notebook, not your computer, but a notebook and a pen, and take notes, even if you don't want them, because it demonstrates a true interest in what the interviewer is having to say. And I've seen so many people didn't walk in with a piece of paper in their hand, didn't have a question, didn't know anything about our company. They didn't get hired.
Right.
That could be, and then send a follow-up. Back in the old days, it was either a handwritten note on a postcard or a short letter. Obviously, now you can do it with an email. Don't really suggest doing it with a text, although maybe in some places even that's okay. But you can really stand out with some kind of follow-up.
Yeah, that next group I love giving advice to with experts like yourself is, most of us start out as individual contributors out of college, and then some want to take the leadership path where you're actually responsible for a team of people. So once they reach that goal and get that promotion and become a manager of a team of people, what advice would you have for them as they begin that leadership journey?
Yeah, two key things. One I've mentioned already. I think as a leader or a senior manager, it's important to be humble because that allows you the ability to be comfortable hiring people that are smarter than you and being willing to listen to them. And all the senior managers I've hired, one of the last questions I ask them is, all right, so if I hire you, will you be willing to disagree with me? And usually you get a little bit of a, deer in the headlights response, but then, the smart ones all say, well, yeah, absolutely. I say that's good because I don't get it right all the time.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's not about whether I'm the one who got it right. It's about whether we get it right for the company. And I say to them, look, you're going to disagree with me on some things and we're going to talk it through. A lot of times I'm going to change my decision or alter it or maybe not do it at all based on the compelling arguments you've made based on your specific area of specialization. Like if it's my chief information officer, head of HR, whatever it was.
Right.
But there's sometimes I'm going to listen to you. I'm not going to agree with you and I'm going to go forward with my decision, but I will listen to you.
Right.
And I think that's the key is they want to be heard and listened to as part of that process. But then that goes hand in hand with the whole belief I have of being a servant leader, where your real job is to set them up for success and give them the environment they need to perform and deliver in their area. And then when they do, don't take the credit for it. You got to give them the credit. More managers lose disrespect from their team probably than anything else when they suddenly, to their superior, take credit for something that one of their team members did.
Yeah, totally agree. I love that advice. Cam, thank you so much for coming on the Corporate Couch. I'm honored. You've had such a fantastic career and you just keep going. I love it. So thank you so much for being on the Corporate Couch today.
Man, it's my pleasure, Jeff. Thank you. You're a great host.
Thank you. What a fantastic career Cam Bishop has had and continues to have. That's the other thing. He's, with all his accomplishments and what he has done, he's still adding value with the Raincatcher and doing all that work, on the buy-sell business side. It's fantastic. It's a storied career. And it just goes to show you, we've seen this countless times, Joe, on the Corporate Couch with our guests. Like, shit happens that this happens. There's no plan. There's no strategy. But he starts this job out of college after his doing forklifts because he was a journalism major and there was,
nobody's hiring
bad
journalism
economy.
majors.
Yeah, he couldn't get a job. So he was a forklift operator at a big box retail store, warehouse or whatever. But here he is. He's at this Intertech Media, which I think got bought out by Prime Media later on. But starts basically he's 22-ish, 23, and there was a company mutiny. Like, I don't know, half the company left.
There was a story behind that he didn't get into.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah, something happened.
Something happened there.
He didn't leave. And all of a sudden, yeah, you're the director of marketing now, and you're running these 10 salespeople also. So he's like 25-ish, and he's
they're all
thrown
twice
into
his
this
age.
job. Yeah, and then he ends up working there for, almost 24 years, becomes the CEO. I mean, it's like that. I'm not gonna say rags to riches story, but I'm just saying, like, that's, I kept asking, at one point, did you think you were going to become the CEO, or did you have a plan? And like, that's what I wanted to be. And he goes, no, things just happened. And all the things, 40 plus company acquisitions he was involved in, and doing, pioneering deals in China after Nixon went there and opened things up. The story of that colleague that it was the only one who could speak Chinese, has to go to some hospital
He goes to hospital.
and get not life flighted out, but he was a German call. I don't know. It was just crazy. All the things he did. It's almost like he was an accidental CEO. And he just brought back a lot of memories of our sprint days, in terms of, we did a lot of total quality management, TQM, and we called it stop, start, continue.
That's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, he called it stop, start, stop, keep. And just the over communication in terms of leadership, and especially during acquisitions. And I thought that was just, he brought humanness to that process where, most acquiring companies treat people like shit, and you don't know anything. We know a lot more than you because we're buying you, so we're better, that ego thing. And the pure gold he got from the chairman, while he was going through these integrations, is first figure out what they're doing right, because we bought them for a reason, and don't screw that up. So anyhow, it's just a really fun conversation with Cam, and I'm glad we recently connected, because we had like 280 LinkedIn connections in common, but we had never met.
Yeah, it was an incredible interview, a very enjoyable interview. He seems like a very enjoyable guy. I really had the idea, not just that mutiny, but I had the idea that he had 100 other stories in his back pocket that he could have pulled out at any time and told, and they would have been amusing, or at least interesting, and brought back so many memories, not just of Sprint, but of overhead projectors and slideshows,
transparencies,
and you can mark on transparency, but don't use red ink. Also, and you're standing there. You're standing there in front of a board with all those transparencies, and you better be ready to answer any question they had about any number that's on that transparency.
Oh yeah, and the hours of practice he did in front of a mirror. Talk about preparation.
Yeah, it was an amazing story. One of the things that I liked that he said towards the end, and this isn't anything new, but it was kind of presented in a new self-deprecating kind of way, was I've always heard before that you should hire people that are smarter than you. I've always heard that before. I never heard it the way that he put it, is that when you're meeting with your staff, I want to be the dumbest person in the room. and
right.
And I, even though that's kind of a weird way of saying it, I know exactly what he meant by it.
Right.
Because you want to make sure that all the people around you are smart enough to carry you. And then your job is just to go to bat for them in front of management.
Right.
And I just thought that was an interesting thing. It certainly flies in the face of what we talked about, I don't know, a week or so ago, about forced ranking.
Right.
That if you have the attitude that I want to be the dumbest person in the room, and then you're forced to go to forced ranking, you should be fired, because you're at the bottom of the chart.
Unless you're the CEO.
So, it was just interesting. Yeah. There's lots of different directions that we could go with that, and I'm glad that we had a chance to hear it.
Yeah, the other thing I loved about Cam was he gave the most detailed career advice for a recent college graduate, which I agreed with all of it. Like he went deep. Like like most people throw out a few things and they're all, good points, but he went deep, and I loved it. I didn't mention it, but that dress for a big book, a famous book at the time, pre-internet, was Dress for Success by John Malloy. And it talked about how you need to dress for an interview. And I remember getting that book, and that was the Bible for me after college, and during college, the interview. Because, you couldn't look it up. Hey, how do I dress for, hey, Chat GPT, how do I dress for an interview? So.
Yeah, the idea is that you dress for the job that you want to have rather than the job that you have.
That was classic advice.
That's classic advice.
I still think it.
I'd heard it just a little bit different than that when I was consulting with Capgemini. We had the attitude of you go into your client, how do you dress for that client? You always dress one level more conservative than what the client is, whatever that means. And that can mean different things for different people, because sometimes that means khakis and a polo shirt, but sometimes it means a three-piece suit. It just sort of depends. But the moral that we had all the time there was one level more conservative than whatever the client was.
Yeah. So you never wore your tank top into the company.
Right. Probably. Tank tops were not a cool thing.
Joe, any type of update you want to give the audience?
Yeah. A few years ago, my girlfriend, I loaned her $100. And after I loaned her that $100, we broke up a couple of months after that. So she gave the $100 back to me. I lost interest in the relationship.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.